everybody, and welcome to the Sunday Show, the daytime, daylight, midday version of the Sunday Show, where we're catching you all just as I know most of you went to church this morning, and then you went to like the after church dinner thing, and now you're just getting back and you're tuning in, and you are all ready after having had a minister stand there and preach to you. You are ready to call in and share what you learned, to share what God has asked you to share, to explain to us what you believe and why we should believe it as well. Joining me this week, John Gleason filling in. How are you, sir?
I'm doing pretty good. Just been really busy with some more off YouTube sort of work. So I haven't really been able to put a lot of content out, but, I've been pretty good.
I have been overwhelmed with a truckload of work too. I'm getting ready to fly out to St. Louis for some pre-surgery screening stuff on my mouth. And I'm adding 2 new electric circuits to the garage. And it's cleanup time, we spring cleaning and everything else, but it's a constant cleaning for snakes and everything else. But here's the thing. I know some of you were expecting Arden to be in here today. Arden's producing, but not going to be on camera today. John agreed to fill in last minute. I'm hugely grateful for that. We are here on the line, ready for you guys to call in, to defend your religious beliefs, your supernatural beliefs, to explain what you believe and why. On my little clip about the show that I posted on Twitter, Facebook, things like that, it was, do even Christians want a Christian nation? If you have thoughts, especially in the election year, on what a Christian nation would look like and why you think you support that, call on in. I'm not just going Zen mode today. I'm going beyond Zen mode. And I'm just going to sit here. I'm not going to be high, but I'm going to be pretty much as chill as when I'm high and asking questions. And plus, if there's somebody that calls in that's like, hey, I really wanted to, address John on this thing here, I'm fine with that too. But the important thing is, if you've been sitting there watching the various discussion shows between atheists and theists and have not yet called in, why not? Because I know there's some people who are like, well, you're in charge of the mute and you're going to mute me and not. It's pretty straightforward. If we ask a question and you're actually answering it and staying on topic, the only time the mute comes in is when there's enough of a delay that we can't, talk over, we don't want to just talk over each other. If you're avoiding the question, like I had a guy call in on Wednesday. It was amazing. It was Paul and I are sitting here and I'm like, yes, but here's the question. And then they'd start talking and it had nothing to do with the question. I'm like, yes, but here's the question. If you just answer the question I ask, it moves the conversation on. It should be good stuff. We've already got some calls in the queue here. So we can give this a try. If you're ready, John, I'm ready.
Oh yeah, I'm totally ready.
Sweet. Calling in from the UK, pronouns are they, them. We've got Pip. Pip, you get to be the first caller on today's Sunday Show. How are you?
Fantastic. I didn't even get to the call screen. Nice to speak to you again. I shall get right to the topic because I'm sure there are going to be plenty of theists lining up relatively soon. But my question today is about when, if ever, it is inappropriate to challenge someone's religion. And I'd like to give a specific example, if I may.
Go for it.
Okay.
Okay, so are you familiar with the unfortunate murder of Brianna J?
That sounds familiar, but I don't have enough details.
Arden can probably fill you more in with the grisly details, but just to make it short, she was a transgender teenager who was murdered about 10 minutes away from where I live. And as such, in February of last year, shortly after the murder took place, my village held a candlelight vigil for her. this was not like a proper funeral proceeding, just a general all welcome, like remembrance thing. And one of the first speakers on the stage at this candlelight vigil was the pastor from the local church. She was talking mostly about, both positive memories of Brianna herself, but also about mindfulness and mental health, which is something that Brianna struggled with a lot. And she said that the local church doors were open to everyone, regardless of their faith or lack thereof, and that she was just happy to provide a listening ear rather than, try and convert anyone. That was not what she was doing. And that's the kind of situation where I felt that, given the context and given the circumstances, it would be wholly inappropriate to challenge that religion, especially because it was such a small part of what she was trying to say. It was a lot more focused on the general humanism that she wanted to offer, and religion was more an afterthought. And so I felt that, that's the kind of time where challenging her religion wouldn't have done anyone any good.
So you're suggesting that somebody at a candlelight vigil, you decided not to challenge their religion because it wasn't the right time and place?
Pretty much. It was the local pastor of the local church, if you will.
Yeah, okay.
Well, so go ahead, Matt.
Go ahead, John. No, you go.
Well, I was just gonna say, I don't know the entire context surrounding that person's congregation or what they generally teach at the church. I think that I would probably bring up any kind of hypocritical position they may be trying to push. Because, I mean, on the surface, it sounds like, oh, they're just trying to open their doors to everybody. But, I mean, obviously, it feels like every denomination is going to be different, and there's more progressive Christians that are out there, possibly more in the UK where you're at. But I would think that unless they were being hypocritical about their general position, then I personally wouldn't think to start bringing up things that just didn't relate to the current situation. Like, for instance, if there was a church here that was like, well, we open up our doors, which I'm in North Alabama, pretty much the asshole of the Bible Belt. And, if a church opened up, it's like, everybody's welcome. We're not trying to proselytize, but at the same time, they spend every Sunday like talking about how trans people don't exist or that they deserve to go to hell or something like that. Like, I would then start questioning things that they were personally teaching about it, and things of that nature. But if like their actions aren't being hypocritical to their general message that they preach at the church, then I wouldn't think to say anything about it. I generally don't have a problem with people who believe like in God or are Christian in general. So it's not like I walk around and I just start questioning people in their religion if they start talking about God, unless it's, something very related to the conversation that we're having or the positions that they have talked about in the past. Then, I just wouldn't think to really bring anything up.
Yeah, I quite agree. I will say that religion is in a bit of a weird position, if you will, in the UK in general, because we have a state religion of Christianity, and it's largely taught in the schools to some extent, but it's all relatively trivial stuff. Like, creationists are extremely rare, and religious orientated hate is, I won't say absent, especially because there's a potential argument from personal incredulity here, but it is a lot less common. And as such, usually it takes the form of just offhand gestures or religious hymns or nativity plays, especially in primary schools. And the context was largely about, as I said, the general principle of humanism. And I think it's really important to, put a broader lens, if you will, on what message is being conveyed. Because you are absolutely right that if there was religious bigotry, especially considering that this candlelight vigil was that of a murdered trans person who was literally killed because she was trans, then I think it would have been extremely important to call that out for the safety of the trans community. But that wasn't the message that I was really getting from that situation. And so that's, what I wanted to highlight is the ideas that were behind the, let's say, the lens of religious bias as opposed to the religion itself.
Yeah, I don't care if someone, so the whole question of when is it appropriate to challenge someone's religion? I don't think of it in terms of religion. I'm not challenging someone's religion. If they make a statement that is problematic and needs to be corrected because there's, imminent harm, risk, etc., I don't care if it's part of their religion or just something that they pulled out of their ass. The way to figure out for me when I'm going to say something is if this is an event that somebody else is run, like if I'm at somebody else's wedding or funeral or a service like this that somebody else is in charge of and I'm not, I generally am not going to say a thing. It's not my place. It's like I'm in somebody else's house, and if this is the people and the ideas that they wanted to present, then they have that right. And it would, it's one of those, I'm not going to, it's Westboro Baptist Church is going to interrupt a funeral to talk about, their hateful mission. Me interrupting a Westboro Baptist Church funeral to tell them how wrong they are. That's just never going to happen. And so I have conversations with people about their religious beliefs when they indicate that they want to have those conversations, or when we are in a public setting and they are advocating for a view just publicly, and it's not like their event. So if we're at a city council meeting and somebody gets up to spew their hateful, rhetoric, whether it comes from their religion or not, I think it's not just acceptable, but perhaps a moral duty to stand up and counter that. On the other hand, if I'm in somebody else's house or at their, whatever ceremony thing they're running, it's not my place. And so that's the criteria that I use to figure out, okay, is there some reason for me to stand up and say something in this particular setting? Because if I just walk into a Baptist church and interrupt the pastor, I'm just being a dick. They're there at church. That's where he gets to, preach his hatred. If I do the same thing at a funeral, I'm probably just being a dick. If I'm at a public, city council meeting, then okay, I'm speaking as one of the people who's officially, if this is for the public to speak, then the person who just spewed hatred has no more vaulted position than I have. And so, whether it's their religion or not, I don't care. I'm going to, there's plenty of really shitty atheists who are anti-LGBTQ, who are incredibly right-leaning on a number of different things, including, like abortion and things like that. It doesn't have to be religion to get me to call it out.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And that's what I was getting at when I was talking about the broader lens, if you will. Because from my perspective, religion is little more than a learned bias that we that we view, that we look through and impose and project rather our own values onto it. And so for both my personal friends who are religious, I'm not necessarily seeing the religion on the occasions that they may talk about. Whether or not the Bible that they do or do not follow, contradicts itself or does not support what they are expressing, is less important to me than the values that they're trying to convey. And so when they are trying to convey a genuine kindness and support, especially for oppressed people, then that is what's most important to me. And as such, it's religion as a base idea, as a concept, absolutely should be challenged just like any other idea. But I think that we as adults can also be tactful and tactful about the context in which religion is expressed, so that we can sometimes really ensure that we have allies to a cause. And that's not to, I want to stress, this is not to say that challenging religion should be a condition to which we have allies, but rather the opposite. Being an ally and how you are expressing your commitment to humanist values should be a condition as to whether or not I'm tolerating religion. Would you generally agree with that?
I don't think of it or care about putting it in terms of religion. Someone can have bad ideas that are part of their religion and are not part of their religion. And there are plenty of good ideas that are part of somebody's religion. I could make a religion that is, it's essentially the foundations of secular humanism. You read the Secular Humanist Manifesto 1, it is there as a religion, as a religious idea. The first Humanist Manifesto is that way. And so if in that context it's religion, what's the objection to that? So instead of doing it with regard to religion and using religion as the bucket to dump things in, it should be bigotry. It should be irrational ideas. It should be ideas without evidence. It should be spreading information that is, harmful and hateful on those fronts. And so the issue becomes one of, as a humanist, when do I have some sort of obligation to step in? When is it okay for me to step in? And when should I not? And, while you phrased it in terms of, I think we as adults can find this, I just tend to look at it as, if there's a difference between public spaces and private spaces, and there's a difference between spaces where myself and whoever is speaking are on equal footing, like as I was mentioned, like at a city council meeting, and when we're on unequal footing, like when they're in my house or when I'm in their house. And, I picked those extremes, but you can sort it out afterwards as to where in between those extremes you are. And there's not always a right answer.
Yeah. There's always going to be gray areas, as with anything in life. But generally, I think you hit the nail on the head there. So thank you very much for your input. It's very much appreciated.
Yep. Cheers, Pip.
Thanks,
have
Pip.
a wonderful have a wonderful end to the rest of your Sunday. All right. On that note, we've started to get theist callers to call in now. We'll go to one of those in just a minute. For any of the atheists who are calling in or on hold, we're always going to prioritize theist calls, and we have a limited number of lines. So there is a chance that as an atheist, you could end up, and people have ended up, on hold for a couple of hours. I want to make sure people are clear on that. Also, when we start talking, you don't have to do a, hey, can you hear me? We'll let you know pretty quickly whether or not we can hear you or not. But we have calling from Germany, Klaus, pronouns are he, him. wants to ask us a question about Yahweh giving us a second chance. So, Klaus, you're on with John and Matt. How are you?
Hey, how you guys doing?
Not bad.
Pretty good.
Yeah, so my question was pretty straightforward. If you pretty much died today and you found yourself in hell, and then Jesus came to you and gave you a second chance to worship him, would you guys take him up on that? Or would you basically say, fuck you, you're an immoral piece of shit, and I'm just going to choose to suffer forever instead of worship you?
So, of course, my I don't have enough information to truly answer this because Jesus got a lot of explaining to do before I make that. But in general, my answer is going to be no. I have no interest and no desire and no need to worship anyone or anything, and any being that requires worship is I already think immoral. But if I'm in hell and Jesus comes down to hell and's like, hey, if you worship me, I'll get you out of here. I'm not even sure that I could. And like, would I be able to fake it and fool Jesus into thinking that I worship, oh yes, you are so mighty. The whole thing doesn't make sense.
If I can butt in real quick, I think that the entire question is rather hilarious to me because let's transpose this. At least this is how my mind works. Let's transpose this to any kind of like real practical situation. Let's say, you're about to fall into a pit of fire, and I walk over to you and I'm like, hey, I can help you up right now, but you have to worship me and pretty much become my slave. If you agree to that, then I'll help you up. Otherwise, I'm going to let you fall, to your death. Is that is that really the mark of a good person right there? Like, is that the mark of anybody that you would want to worship or like love or anything like that? Like, and that's before we even get into the theology of Christianity and Jesus and what Yahweh did in the Old Testament and all that kind of stuff. I mean, the entire premise that you've set up here is rather ridiculous to me. As if to make it out to be like, oh, if Jesus revealed himself to you after you die and you're burning in hell, would you worship him then? My answer would be the same as letting somebody fall to their death. Fuck no, I would not, because that is a ridiculous situation and is not representative of anybody that anybody should worship or follow, even if there's any kind of good reason to do either of those things.
Okay. So do you think that the United States should torture people when they're doing interrogations?
I'm really
enhanced
interrogations. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Matt.
I'm just really confused because you called in to ask something about Jesus and whether we should, whether we'd adhere to a second chance. And now you've jumped to torture. I don't understand the connection between the question.
I'm getting there, if you let me.
Well, that means that what you said you called in about isn't what you actually called in about.
It is. It was just a jumping off one.
Okay, well, let's jump off then.
Okay. So yeah, are you guys down with like enhanced interrogation techniques, like the CIA? Okay. So why not?
No, it's definitely been proven that enhanced interrogation techniques generally produce false information because the person just will tell you anything to make it stop. And so it just
exactly. So you guys think you guys think you'd be able to withstand that in hell? You think you'd be able to say, no, I'm going to stand on my beliefs. I'm going to ignore
I have
this
no
torture
idea. I
and
have no,
continue.
I have
Yeah.
no, Klaus, I have no idea what I would actually do in hell because I'm not in hell. Maybe with a gun to my head, would I say that I worship Jesus? You bet. Maybe if I'm in hell and there's a chance and it's just absolute torment, maybe I would lie. That's why I asked if it was possible to fool Jesus. But if you ask a hypothetical, the whole point of the hypothetical is to get to what is your ideal. To suggest that I wouldn't have the strength to say no to Jesus while I'm in hell is completely irrelevant to the point of asking the question.
Oh.
Okay. And
And
Klaus ran away.
Oh shit. I mean, I was just gonna say like the entire question that Klaus presented was I mean, still ridiculous. I don't care how he goes about it. Like the entire proposition of like Jesus could save you, but only if you worship his dick is like it's a totally ridiculous thing to even present to somebody, I feel.
It's first of all, I mean, John, I mean, coming from my Christian background, there's nothing about Christian theology in an orthodox sense, in the sense of the overwhelming majority of denominations that suggest anybody in hell is going to get a second chance. But what is the second chance? It's not consistent with doctrine. So for example, if I put my Southern Baptist hat back on, salvation is by grace through faith. And so what that essentially means under the Baptist model is that God chooses who he's going to save, and it is God's grace that instills within you the faith that will lead to your conversion. It's not, no action that you do or anything else. And so you're like, oh, if you were in hell though, and Jesus came down and said, hey, I can get you out of here. Yeah. Is it possible that in hell I would say or do absolutely anything to get the suffering to stop? Sure. But if we're talking about an ideal and what, me as someone with values and integrity would suggest is the case, this is why I was saying Jesus has got plenty of explaining to do. If Jesus comes down and I'm in hell and is like, oh, I can get you out of here if you worship me. I might go, yes, I worship you. Oh my God, I worship you so much. You are so awesome. Ooh, you are so good. And the question then becomes, did I fool God? Is this God so weak and feeble and inept that it thinks, aha, I got another real worshiper? Just like if you walked up to somebody with a gun and were like, give me your money or your life. That's just the normal kind of process of saying, hey, I'm going to bully you into saying something you don't believe. Is it possible for me to say something I don't believe? You bet. Absolutely. You pay me enough, I'll say whatever the fuck you want. You give me $1 million right now and I will tell you how much I love Jesus. It won't be true. But would I say it for $1 million? Of course, because I can always correct it afterwards and I can correct it before. So I just don't get the purpose of a question like that.
Yeah, I don't either. But typically, whenever somebody asks me that kind of question, it's always leading to the whole thing of, well, that means that you just don't want to believe and worship Jesus. So, like, that's the reason why you're an atheist.
Yeah,
it's usually to chase you into that corner.
And that's why, when Klaus was going down the road of, torture and enhanced interrogation techniques, we know that it leads to problems. And that's why, even when I first answered the question, I started off with, oh, can I fool God? Because somebody who's under an enhanced interrogation, their only concern is to get it to stop. And if it turns out saying something that isn't true gets it to stop, then I'll say what isn't true. We already know people do that. The issue is the people who are doing the torture don't need, if they're God, they don't need to torture you for information. They already know the truth. And so What the scenario doesn't make sense. Ooh, what happens if an all-knowing God asks you to honestly tell them what you think of them? Would you tell them? Well, if he's already all-knowing, of course I can tell him, because he already knows. What's the point in lying? And what's the point in lying anyway? If God showed up right now and said, "Hey man, I'm really not the bad guy you heard about. I'd like for you to worship me," I would have lots of questions. Number one, what do you really like? What are you looking for? What are your values? But also, why are you obsessed with this notion of worship? And what does worship mean to you? Because if it just means I'm going to adhere to your policies and everything else, cool. Then it's not you that I'm worshiping, it's the ideas. And even that's not worship, it's just adherence to. I don't know.
Do you think, and we can get to the next theist caller right after this question, but I kind of feel like proposing that kind of question, like, as like, would you then worship Jesus in order to get into heaven? Do you think that rules out like the moral argument that is sometimes made by apologists, like saying that, oh, well, morally good people go to heaven? Like, I kind of feel like it rules out like being a morally good person at that point. Like, it's solely focused on like faith in Jesus.
Yeah, I come from a background where no one is good, not one, and there's nothing you can do that is good, and we are all just filthy wretches that God either chooses to save or doesn't, and the best you can do is try to live a Christ-like life, and be thankful that you are one of the elect, one of the chosen, that are going to go to heaven. This notion that good people go to heaven and bad people go to hell, first of all, not biblical. Hardly at all. I mean, you got to really stretch to read some verses that suggest that. And so the people that end up doing that, these are the people who were raised in a church but didn't understand it. I watched a video, I'm not going to say who, from an atheist that I actively despise. And he posted a video. I'm not going to give details on it, but it references a Bible verse that is supposedly problematic. And there's absolutely no problem. It is a straightforward, this atheist does not understand the basics of Christian doctrine and how that passage in the Bible should be read. And so they read it and they make a video, and all they're going to get is some Christians are going to be like, "Oh, you don't understand. You took it out of context," or whatever else. And the Christians aren't wrong. This person made a bad video about a verse that's not a problem. And I was just sitting there going, this just made my job harder, because somebody's going to call and ask about this verse at some point, and then I'm going to have to go through. And every time I have to point out, oh yeah, the Christians got this part right, or yes, there's another atheist that gets this wrong. There's just no guarantee that whether or not you're an atheist or a theist, that you are engaged in skepticism or critical thinking, or that you know and understand even, what the Bible has to say. There was a guy called in just the other day whose view of the Bible is that Christians eventually become capable of not sinning. And I'm like, when does that happen? And can you give me an example? I'd love, who's the example of the Christian who got to a point where they never sinned anymore? And he's like, well, I suspect Paul got that. Wait, what you suspect about someone who's been dead for 2 millennia is complete. That's not evidence.
Well, and I don't think it makes sense. Is it in Paul's epistles where it says that we have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God? Is that Paul, or I can't remember where that is in the Bible?
No, that's not Paul. Ooh. It might be. But in any case, the issue, the issue here is that there are passages that people have spent a lifetime trying to make sense of. And apologists sometimes don't agree. And if you can take any verse standalone and respin it, but you have to look at it in the context there. And it's actually quite often theists, Christians in particular, that are ignoring the context. They pick a context from the Bible, oh, this is all tied to the story of salvation. And so, yeah, for all have sinned and fallen short. Yes, that's Paul. It's in Romans. Yes, somebody in chat did it. So yes, that is Paul. But that's a secondary issue, because that's everybody has sinned. The caller was saying every Christian can get to a point where they no longer sin. And that, I don't know where they got that. It went, because when they tried to point to chapter and verse of where they got that idea, it talked about being sinless and blameless, but that's not about, hey, I don't sin anymore. That's about my sins are forgiven. And similarly, there's a quote. Well, no, I don't want to direct anybody to the video. Let's get to some more callers. I'm staying in super chill mode and don't need to start a fight with somebody I can't stand to talk to anyway. So Leonard in Germany is a theist calling, pronouns are they, them,
Hello.
Trying to convert us to their religion. So
Hey,
Leonard,
what is
Leonard, what is your religion and why should we convert to it?
Yes, I'm a Buddhist, and you previously said that you have no problem with like secular Buddhists, and maybe there are some that do, but I certainly don't. So why shouldn't you be one of those secular Buddhists?
Well, I just asked why, what religion and why I should believe it or accept it. And all you said was Buddhism, and then asked why I shouldn't. That's not how this works, Leonard. That's not how this works, Leonard. You are advocating.
Okay.
Hang on.
Please?
You are advocating for a religion. You need to tell us what it is, not just, oh, it's Buddhism. What specific view do you have, and why should we share it? And is it important?
Okay.
Because if, for example, you and I share a view, and you think that view is a part of Buddhism, but I think that view is just part of secular humanism, why is it important for me, if we both accept that view, to say I'm a Buddhist? So there's a bunch for you to do.
May I elaborate? So the thing is, religion mobilizes you. You also said this, yes, and the reason why this MAGA gaining influence is because they are mobilized by religion, by the dangerous homophobic Christianity. And so
Leonard,
there is another religion, Buddhism, and religion mobilized, and Buddhism,
Leonard,
unlike Christianity, you can be forgiven when you're
Leonard,
dead. You tell if in Buddhism.
Okay, I'm going to mute you since whatever reason you can't. I'm having difficulty understanding what you're saying. Did you say that MAGA, like Make America Great, is mobilized by religion? Did I hear that correctly? Is that what you were saying?
I'm saying that religion mobilizes, and Buddhism has Buddhism reflects very moral points. For like first of
Leonard,
all, hell is there not forever. Please let
Leonard,
me talk. Okay,
Leonard, I need you to explain. Give me a position that is part of the Buddhism that you're advocating for, and why I should accept it. I don't need to hear how religion mobilizes. I don't give a shit. I need to hear, here's a Buddhist position, and here's why you should accept it. But you can start with, here's a Buddhist position, and then ask us if we do accept it, because we might already.
Okay, women's rights. Mahayana Buddhism believes that men and women can equally be enlightened. You agree on that? Do you?
I have no idea what enlightenment is, but but I don't need Buddhism in any way to hold to equal access and equal opportunity amongst genders.
Yes, but religion is a very strong tool, a very powerful tool.
I don't know what you're saying.
I think that religion
Leonard,
is a very powerful tool.
Right. We understand that religion's a powerful tool, but I mean, I don't really care about as far as like whether or not I would be, as far as whether or not I would adhere to the religion. Like, I don't care how powerful of a tool it is. Can you maybe, I know Matt just asked this, but can you just state a position that's unique to the religious aspect of Buddhism that you think is like adds to the secularist stuff?
Two things. Firstly, trans people, they are more than two genders. We agree on that, right?
Okay, Leonard, I'm gonna mute you again. I don't need to hear anything at all about MAGA or trans folks or religions mobilizing or religions being a powerful tool. Genuinely, don't know how else to say this, do not give a fuck. What John and I would like to know is, what do you believe and why should we also believe it? So just state one position that is a position of the Buddhism you're advocating for. Just one. What's the position?
The position and forgiveness, you can be forgiven for all your bad deeds at every time when you're dead, that no matter how bad you were, Sakyamuni forgave the man who wanted to kill him. And yes, and the thing with forgiveness is by Buddha.
I have no idea. I have no idea what you're talking about. What is the position that you're saying?
You can be forgiven for your sins.
Hang on. Can you shut up? Can you shut up until I'm done asking the question again and then go? So the question is this: as succinctly as possible, state one position, just a sentence that says, my one Buddhist belief is, followed by whatever that belief is.
One? I don't have one single view.
Leonard, if you have 45 views or 45,000 views that are all tied to Buddhism, I only need you to tell me one. Just state one. I'm not saying you only have one. I'm saying let's just fucking start with one. So when I unmute, give me one position that you advocate as a Buddhist, and then we'll tell you whether or not we agree with it. And if we do agree with it, then we're done with that particular issue. If we don't agree with it, then we can have a discussion about why we should or shouldn't. This is the last chance I'm giving you on this. Name one position very clearly in one sentence that you advocate for as a Buddhist.
Yes, you can be forgiven from your sins.
So your position as a Buddhist is that you can be forgiven for your sins.
Every time. Yes. Better than in Christianity.
Leonard.
Sorry.
Am I correct that what you're saying is that your Buddhist position is that you can be forgiven for your sins?
Yes, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah, yes.
What's a sin, and why do I need to be forgiven of it? And how does Buddhism forgive
murder?
Okay.
You're a mass murderer?
Okay, so if I murder people, Buddhism allows me to be forgiven for that? How?
Better than Christianity. When you...
I didn't ask anything at all. Shut up. I didn't ask anything at all about whether it's better than Christianity. Hello? How
Hello?
does Buddhism forgive me for murder?
Well, when you how do I say, when you do something, when you murder, but then you do something to show that you're sorry, like I don't know, you pay oh,
So
Yes.
let me ask this. Is it if I go out and I murder my neighbor right now, but directly after I murder my neighbor, I psychically transmit how really sorry I feel to my God?
No, it's not that
Does
easy.
that mean that it's like it never happened? Like is
It's
that
not
the
that easy.
concept here? I'm just
You have
trying to figure it
atone
out.
for that. Forgiveness here is like it's like what it's like in liposuction. You have to work harder. And
You have to work harder.
Like liposuction. What the hell does that mean?
Like
like
life.
atoning.
I'm just trying to figure out like what is the religious tenet here as far as like sins go, because coming from my perspective, I see sins as transgressions against God, so it's not necessarily like some morally abhorrent action that somebody does. It's a transgression against a God in particular, and so that can be a wide range of things that are considered sins. And so it's also different as to how you get salvation for those sins. And I'm just trying to figure out exactly how that works in your particular religion, because it just seems like, oh, if you're really sorry about it, then you're forgiven of it. And it's like, okay. Okay. Sorry if I'm misunderstanding here.
Not like this. It's like even when you have to gain trust. That's like how it works. So we pay for what you did. Like atoning, yes.
So what's weird, Leonard, is that you talk about forgiveness and atonement. At no point did those concepts make any sense to me under Buddhism. Those are more like Christian concepts. So
if they stole it from Buddhism.
What?
Jesus Christ.
Leonard,
they stole it
if
from Buddhism.
Leonard, if I murder someone, how does Buddhism get me forgiveness for murder, and how does that help anybody?
You know what?
We feel the same way, Leonard.
Leonard, how does Buddhism forgive me, and how does that help anybody?
Help anybody?
If I murder John, if I murder John right now, how do I get forgiveness in Buddhism, and what good does that do me or John or anybody else?
When you give his family money, a lot of money. Like for example, when you give his family a lot of money as a kind of, what's the word
John,
again?
John, I'm sorry. Leonard, don't ever call me again. Okay. That's as absolute beyond Zen as I can be. That caller is not representing any form of Buddhism that is consistent with anything that I've looked up. When you start talking about MAGA and religious power and how it's kind of like liposuction, and then you can't offer any clarification at all, then either we have a massive language barrier, or we have just a prank call. I don't know, but I'll tell you this, Leonard. If your Buddhism could forgive me for murdering John, I still don't want anything to do with it. I don't understand what that means. John's dead. Forgiving me doesn't bring John back or help him out in any way. It doesn't help out John's family in any way. I'm pretty sure Casey doesn't care if Buddhism forgives me for killing John. I don't think she will. And I don't think Buddhism forgiving me will do her any good. It's just bizarre. I don't know what's going on lately. It's like there are no theists out there who have any interest in honestly defending their beliefs in any reasonable sense. Instead, it's, oh, I want to convert you to Buddhism, but everything I say sounds nothing at all like Buddhism, and I can't even answer the first, most basic, simple question. Oh, what's one tenet of Buddhism? Ah, it can forgive you. Really? Because the notion of Buddhism isn't a thing about forgiveness, and it doesn't have a concept of sin. If anything, it's tied to the originating Hindu notions of karma. And I mean, that's where Buddhism kind of originated from, was that. So I don't understand. I have difficulty taking someone seriously when they use the language in English of sin and forgiveness that's tied to Christian theism and other similar theisms, and then try to suggest that this is a part of Buddhism. I don't believe you, Leonard. I don't understand you, Leonard, but at a minimum, we're not going to make any progress on the show. So what I really need is for people to call in and say, here's what I believe. Here's why I believe it. Here's why I think you should believe it too.
That'd be really nice if we could get somebody that like talks it up big in the chat there to call in. But it kind of seems like they always run scared when it's like, God, do you want to defend that position? They're like, I've got stuff to do.
It's really strange. I mean, I don't want to, I won't do this, and I don't want to do this, but I could genuinely put on, metaphorically or literally, I guess, my Jesus hat and do a better job defending Christianity than any caller we've had in the last month that I'm aware of. It's bizarre, but even that, Leonard wasn't calling to defend Christianity. Leonard's calling to defend Buddhism. But all right, we got other callers here. We got George, pronouns are he, him in Canada, has a question or comment about free will versus sin. So welcome, George. You're on with Matt and John.
Hey, Matt. Hey, John. Glad to be on the show. So I just had a small, but looked like an epiphany I had recently on the idea that when some Christians at least talk about humanity having a sin nature, and that is what causes us to need to be saved and be forgiven, or whatever. And I was thinking about what sin nature is, and that comes from what a sin is. A sin basically is supposed to be being able to, or going against God's wishes. So a sin nature is being able to go against what God wants for you. But that's what free will is supposed to be. So on one hand, whenever the Christians want to downplay it, they call it sin nature. But whenever they need to justify it, they call it free will. So it's, in essence, this could be the same thing at least on some version of Christianity, I guess. So what's your where am I wrong?
So free will means that you are free to either engage in sin or not engage in sin. Sinful nature means that you are predisposed to have an increased likelihood of opting for sin.
And if I didn't have a sin nature, I could still sin, right? That's the idea.
Yes, it's two completely different concepts. One is about, are you free to make up your own mind? And the other is about, what is your mind most likely going to trend towards?
Yeah, that makes sense. Although I have been listening to people defending it like it's completely different. Like if you don't, when the idea is that you no longer have, once you're reborn, born again, you no longer have a sin nature, so therefore you can't sin anymore while you're in heaven. Or do you not have free will in heaven? I don't get it. Sometimes it makes me, but it looks like the ideas are related, but it doesn't seem like it's like it seems like what they're using one or the other when the situation doesn't match.
I'd need to know exactly what somebody said, but there are people who will tell you that there's free will in heaven, but there's not even free will here in the sense that they're talking about. So I don't know why they would say there's free will in heaven, but those same people would say there is no sin in heaven. And so the apologetic that explains that is, God is only going to send people to heaven who he knows are not going to sin. They would still technically be free to. There's no limit. God just knows their nature and knows that these people are not going to sin.
I get what you're saying. It still seems a bit weird to me, but that's not your fault, of course.
Everything about it's fucking weird.
All right, Matt. Anyway, that clears up a bit. Thanks for the call.
Okay, thanks.
Have a good day.
You too. I don't know, John. I've said before, you end up in heaven, and like, my mom thinks she's going to heaven and I'm going to hell. But also there's not going to be any sadness in heaven. And my mom couldn't possibly not be sad if she's in heaven and I'm in hell, which means whatever ends up in heaven isn't actually my mom, but it's some facsimile of it. So I could just say, hey, Mom, you're not going to go to heaven. You're not going to be you in heaven. There's going to be some, Gollum version and some manufactured facsimile of my mom. Like, it's like you had an emotional lobotomy. Like God removed your ability to care and be empathetic and to love and to care about your kids. God has to remove all of that in order for you to be in heaven and not be sad. Or I guess there are people, I think you're muted. I don't know how many times you might have been trying to say something and I just couldn't hear you because I wasn't looking at the screen.
I'm always surprised when people don't thoughtfully consider what the Bible teaches about heaven, and whether or not that is actually a good outcome that they would want to get to. Because like you said, obviously it's more of a facsimile of yourself that's apparently sent to heaven. And what the Bible actually says about heaven is not exactly something that I was really ever taught in church, like in my younger years. And I never really considered, the actual heaven that exists. Everybody kind of paints it as this just wonderful place to go to. And that's where you want to go to, as opposed to the burning hell, and everything. So they don't really they don't really carefully consider what heaven is.
Yeah, it's when we're talking about who gets to heaven and under what criteria, we're already making some assumptions that there is such a thing, or at least there's a clear doctrine about those sorts of things, and there's really not. Soteriology is the specific name for studying what must be done to be saved. And yet that already begins with the concept that there's something to be saved from and something to be saved to. So we're kind of just saying, oh, well, there's some sort of afterlife, which we have no reason to think is true, and insufficient evidence to make any conclusion is true, let alone insufficient evidence to conclude the specifics of it. And yet we need all of that to be true in order to have any sort of discussion about this, like, oh, are you going to the good place or the bad place? And so what does the Bible have to say about it? Well, that's the first place a lot of us, tend to go in these discussions, because that's the predominant holy book for the religions that tend to surround us. But you have to also ask, why should I go to the Bible to find out about an afterlife? Why shouldn't I go to the Bhagavad Gita? Why shouldn't I go to, Dianetics? Pick a book with some sort of claim about, what happens to us after we die. I need a reason why I would pick one book over another. I need a reason why I would pick one particular religion over another. And so when somebody tells me, oh, I believe it because the Bible says so. Okay. If somebody came to you and said they believe it because the Quran says so, is that a good enough? I mean, if it's good enough to say because the Bible said so, then why isn't it also good enough to say because Dianetics said so, or because the Quran says so, or something else? And generally speaking, because we grow up surrounded by religious belief, we talk about things in those terms. It's permeated the culture, and it already begins a lot of assumptions, even amongst people who don't believe. It strikes me as odd. It's become kind of the default assumption that everybody believes in a God in some way or something, and it's just about fine-tuning what they specifically believe. And yet when you talk to a good chunk of these people, it seems that they either believe in the God that they were taught to believe in from a young age or whatever, or the version that they like the most or that fits whatever their understanding is, no matter how. Everybody on the internet's an expert in seemingly everything now. And yet it looks like we're all experts on religion until we disagree, and then we have zero ways to resolve it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
I don't know. We got some calls queuing up, but Gustavo in California, pronouns are he, him, has a question about
Hi,
people believing in God. So welcome, Gustavo. You're on with John and Matt.
Hi, Matt. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, I watch your show once in a while. I find it quite hilarious often. So just quick, I'm an atheist. I really don't believe in God. I'm actually surprised I even got into the line. So thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I grew up religious Catholic. This that stuff family like it throw at you and you kind of swallow, but you never really understand. Until my 30s, I started reading about it. And it sort of clicked to me. Obvious, there's nothing. I mean, if God exists, it's obvious that everything would be very different. But set that aside, what I don't really get it throughout the years is that, especially in your show, right, you see these guys, man, some super well educated, and they just deny reality completely. It seems like everything, when it comes to God or Jesus, no evidence whatsoever, but they deny reality. And my question to you, because I think you have a lot more data than I have, why, in your opinion, these people believe in that? It blows me away. Like, even this high clerk church, these guys are highly educated. Most of them. How come they believe in this with no evidence? So that is my question. And just to follow up, one one theory, hypothesis that I have, that happened to me that sort of click out. That might be it. I see it as like God for these people. It's like a defense mechanism of the brain. When someone cannot accept reality, so the brain kicks in and just protects you and gives you comforting. In my example, it happened to me. My son, I have a young son, and then he came to me and asked me, Dad, will I go to heaven when I die? And obviously, for a parent, like for me, the worst thing possible I can think is my son dying before me. But I know sometimes it happens. And even me, a complete atheist, hardcore, I look at his face and say, no, no, you will go to hell. And then he comforts himself. But obviously, when it comes to the right age, I'm going to tell him, dude, there's nothing. When you die, it's all black for everybody. But some people like me and others, we don't deny reality. So live your life as best as you can. So in a sense, I use the same way as a defense mechanism. But that's my question because I really, really don't get it. Like a PhD in physics, a PhD in biology, a doctor, believe that, geez, I mean, this thing doesn't even exist. There's no evidence whatsoever. Why, my only explanation is the brain trying to kind of cover up for some insatisfaction, some fear, or something that the reality is too hard. Anyway, I don't know if you understood the question, but that is my question.
Well, I don't know, John. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I feel like I'm not going to sit here and just portray religious people as like psychologically needing God or religion and as a defense mechanism or something. I think that it probably can act as a defense mechanism, but I also think that there are a lot of religious people have been indoctrinated since they were young. And so it's just kind of something that they've always grown up with. But to explain why highly educated people are religious instead of like atheist or more secular leaning, I would say that it's probably more or less about compartmentalization. Like they're able to compartmentalize their religious belief and separate that from like whatever they're highly educated about or in. I know I work in a highly educated field in one of the most degreed cities, at least in the South. And I work around people that are incredibly intelligent, but they're all Christian. And I mean, basically everybody has grown up with religion. They've been religious their entire lives, and they're so expertly trained in compartmentalization through the years of being religious that it they don't I guess consider things from a more secular kind of point of view. It's always just made sense to them. And so I think that also plays into cognitive dissonance, because like when you get this new information about stuff and then you either work it in, change your worldview and work it in, or you reject it in preference for the old information. And I think that a lot of times people are just sort of trained to reject any kind of new information like that, and it's just easier through that compartmentalization to hold on to their longstanding religious beliefs. And so I don't think that it's necessarily like they want to be religious for like a defense mechanism or to as like a something to comfort them or something like that. I feel like most religious people have been brought up religious, and so like through various different psychological things, they just hold on to it. And I don't think that there's anything necessarily wrong with that, although I will say that holding on to beliefs that don't comport with reality can end up getting you into a bad situation. And so that's why I advocate for critically analyzing whatever beliefs you have and only believing in things that do comport with reality. I would hesitate to tell anybody that, oh, you only believe for like defense mechanism purposes or something like that. I mean, I feel like that's kind of imposing some kind of idea about their motivations, and you just simply can't know that unless they explicitly tell you.
Yeah, I think it's a mistake to pretend that I understand your mind better than you do, or that you understand my mind better than I do. It may be true. I mean, there are plenty of people who are experts in psychological motivations and things like that. But generally speaking, once again, we got another issue here where you're basically saying, how is it that educated people can believe in God? And you know what confuses me more? How can educated people not understand game theory and best solutions? How can they not understand the value of cooperation and the value of empathy? How can they not understand the benefits of equality and equal rights? How can they wind up being Trump voters? How can 49% of Americans think that the unemployment rate is at a 30-year high when it's at a 30-year low? I mean, this is just a straight up, here's a fact about reality, an observable, testable, identifiable fact about what the unemployment rate is and comparing it to what it's been at different points. And one half of the population, pretty much 49%, managed to get it wrong. We're talking about people, yes, there's not everybody's necessarily all that educated, but there's plenty of educated people who are, buying into this. And it's because, first of all, educated and smart people tend to be pretty good at rationalizing justifications for things that they believe, even though the reasons they believe them aren't smart. And part of that is because they think they're smart. Hey, I'm a smart guy. I went to college. I got a degree. I'm not going to get something like this wrong. And so if my view on this is that the overwhelming majority of people have believed in some kind of God, I can't imagine how everything got here without some kind of God. Maybe they don't have the specifics right, but why buck the system? Let me just go with it and run with it. How much they actually believe of what they profess is a completely separate question. But there's nothing about being a theist that has anything to do with how educated or smart you are. When I stopped believing, my IQ did not go up. As a matter of fact, it probably has gone down, as we know the trend as you age is for it to lower. And I didn't get more credentialed or I gained a slightly better understanding of some aspects of reality, but not through education.
Okay, understand. Thanks for the answer. I just find this interesting to me. Even like recently, I don't want to take much of your time for things for the call. Just one last thing that happened. That's very recent. I was dating this woman. She was a physician, but she did this work in Africa, and she went there, took care of a bunch of poor, very extremely poor. They die of famine, and then literally, I can't even imagine what she saw. But she was telling me this is like a normal thing, normal day in the hospital. They bring a truck loaded with dead African children that died from famine. And then when I was asking her about, well, do you really believe in God? And the answer that she tells me, and then again, this is a physician that work in Africa and saw these things that I don't think, most of us will ever see this so horrendous. And she told, well, I have to believe that there is, because what I saw, I cannot imagine there isn't any God. And it's interesting to me, it was kind of the opposite. What you tell me, if it comes a truckload of dead children, that's to me even more evidence there is no God.
Yeah.
It's the opposite, because that would not even be happening. That would never happen. But it's just very interesting. But anyway, thank you very much.
Yep. Thanks, Gustavo. I'll address this point once we drop the call a little bit. It makes sense to me in a way. I mean, I'm not, when I say it makes sense to me, I'm not saying this is rational. I'm saying that I understand the reason why people do this. When somebody looks at, children dying and sees some of them can be rescued through intervention, I understand why somebody can say, ooh, I kind of have to believe there's a God, because otherwise those deaths happened for nothing. They're just a waste. It's, and so I understand that appeal. But what you're actually saying is, I don't have any good reason to believe. I just really, really hope it's true, because otherwise stuff looks really sad. But the other thing is that if you believe, and this is what Gustavo was pointing out, if you believe that there's a God, and you are looking at truckloads of dead children, that should make you doubt that there's any kind of good or just God. As if in fact, every single person, I did this actually, I just released a video and did a premiere the other day about God as an abortion provider. Why is God sending fetuses to people who he knows are going to abort them? If God knows what's going to happen, and there are people who are desperate to get pregnant, who don't get pregnant. There are people of every different religion praying to their God desperately, please, we want a baby, please, we want a baby, please, we want a baby, who never get pregnant. And yet, evidently, that same being is sending fetuses down to people who don't want to be pregnant and who will absolutely destroy that fetus. That makes no sense. And the same thing is true when you say, oh, there's all these kids who are dying over here. Why did God establish a scenario where a child can be born, never do or say a single thing, never think any sort of thought and express it to anyone else, has no substantive existence of their own, dies the instant they take their first breath? They come out of a womb, they get the umbilical cord cut, and they die. That makes no sense. I know theists can hand wave and be like, that's because of our sinful nature. Man's sin against God brought sin and death into the world. Yes, I understand that's what you believe. You have no more evidence for that being true than anything else. But you don't get to say that there's a good God who's doing that. Because a good God, first of all, we didn't have to be created by a God with the ability to reproduce sexually. There are other species on the planet that don't reproduce sexually. There are many reptiles that are completely parthenogenic. And you know what that does? That means that like butterfly agamas are entirely female. And while they will engage in, sexual activity between the females, there's no insemination, there's no intercourse that results in a pregnancy. They reproduce parthenogenically. They just make a clone copy of themselves. If you made humans and created them with the ability to reproduce parthenogenically, first of all, we'd all be women. Second of all, you would end sexual assault entirely. There would be no possibility of it. There would be no motivation for it. You would take away that opportunity, which means nobody could ever sexually assault anyone of any age. And you've already made what is potentially a better world. And yet, there's a supposedly good God that took a couple of people, according to, scripture, somebody's scripture, and stuck them down in a garden and said, don't eat this tree, don't eat that tree, you can eat that tree. And the trees are magical and they provide abilities and knowledge and powers, and it is, and when they disobey, oh, I'm going to punish you, but I knew it was coming. It's really strange.
Yeah, I agree. It is really strange, and to hear the explanations for like why the evil is in the world and everything like that, and to hear people like say, oh well, it's Satan, like say that's Satan's doing, that's not God's doing. And it's so funny that to me whenever they say that, because it's like, well, isn't your God supposed to be all powerful? Like Satan is apparently able to slip past the cracks of God, even though he's omnipresent. Like it does cast a lot of doubt on not only the omnibenevolence of this definition of God, but in many other aspects of it, like you've pointed out, Matt.
Yeah. We got other callers. This is calling in from Pennsylvania, or somewhere in the U.S. Okay, Aben, is it Aben? Is it Aben? I don't know how to pronounce it.
Oh, Aban.
Aban, pronouns he, him,
Yeah.
wants to explain. It says here, you say the book that Matthew to Revelation, so what Christians would identify as the New Testament, you say that's not part of Yahweh's laws, statutes, or commandments. That's what you want to talk about?
Yes, well, it's not that I'm making that statement. I'm just reiterating what's written in the sense of the narrative and context of the Matthew to Revelation book, that they tell people it's a continuance of our God's laws, statutes, and commandments. And that's nowadays, or even before, whenever anyone reads that book and Yahweh's laws, statutes, and commandments, anyone and everyone, their outcome, their analysis is always, they contradict themselves. So,
Okay.
yes. So it's like one of those when, yes, I'm sorry.
So do you have some section of some portion of books that you think are Yahweh's laws, statutes, and commandments?
Well, they classify them nowadays as the Dead Sea Scroll texts.
Well, okay, so I don't know who they are, or
well, in the sense of academia, secular, and obviously people who they want to use the word religion, if they want to use that word, but a study system. The people who do study systems, belief systems, they know that book has nothing to do with Yahweh's.
It's like you're not listening. It's like you're not listening to the question, because I'm no longer asking about the New Testament, which for some reason you seem to be afraid to call it the New Testament, and you keep going to that book. But whether you believe it or accept it or whatever else, it's called the New Testament. You can say it's not a New Testament, but what I'm asking you is, do you advocate for you personally? I don't care about what you're pointing to, because you tried to say secular scholars. And my question was, do you advocate for some group of books that are in fact Yahweh's laws, statutes, and commandments? And you said that secular scholars hold to something, and that's not true. Secular scholars don't make any pronouncement at all about which books are or are not from a God. So I'm asking you, which books are you advocating for that are from a God, and how do you know? Hello? Are you still there? It says you're still there. Are you muted?
Sometimes, is it a web caller? Sometimes with web callers, if they're on the phone and they have it to their face, their phone will fall asleep. You have to pull the phone away, kind of wake it up, and then put it back, and that should reestablish the audio.
Yes, good afternoon. Hello.
Yeah, you're still here. So.
Yes. Okay. Now, yes, you asked which books, and I mentioned the Dead Sea Scroll texts. Now, those texts,
the Dead Sea Scrolls what?
The Dead Sea Scroll manuscripts, they have our God's name in it. Those are the earliest writings of what they want to call Yahweh's laws, statutes, and commandments, scripture.
Okay. So if I can interrupt, does that mean that you follow the Jewish Bible then? Like, or would you consider yourself Jewish?
No. The term Jewish applies to the people who believe in the Kabbalah, the Targum, the Talmud, the Mishnah, the Midrash. Those are Jewish people. They don't adhere to the Dead Sea Scroll manuscripts. They adhere to their Leningrad or to their commentaries.
Okay. Well, then let's move past that. Then, can you name some of the books that you say are from God? Maybe we can start there. I mean, you've given us the Dead Sea Scrolls, but the Dead Sea Scrolls, I mean, there's a lot of things in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So I'm just wondering if you can maybe point to specific books that you think contain Yahweh's laws, commandments, statements, or statutes.
Yes. Enoch, Jubilees, the Testament of 12 Patriarchs, Genesis to Malachi, and what they call the Apocrypha.
Okay. So wow, that's strange because you just dipped into Catholic stuff there. But the question is, those books that you point to, with a Enoch, whatever. How do you know they're the actual books from a god?
Remember, you got to wake your phone up.
We can't hear a thing you're saying.
Okay, hello.
There.
I don't understand.
Yes.
Hello.
I think he's yes.
Your phone,
Okay,
phone, because you're calling on a web thing instead of via the phone number. Your phone keeps falling asleep when you're not talking, and you have to do something to actually wake it up. So
understood.
So the books that you're talking about from the Dead Sea Scrolls, what reason do we have to think that those are in any way representative of the mind of an actual existing God?
Because they supersede any writings that people adhere to today.
No. First of all, that's not true. But even if they were the oldest writing, that doesn't in any way demonstrate that writing is representative of the mind of a god.
Okay, well then let's go, and you can go, since it sounds like you just said no. Now, remember, they say that the Matthew to Revelation book is a continuance of God's Lord statutes and commandments. So
I'm sorry, but I need you to answer the question that I'm asking. And that is, what evidence do you have that the books you're pointing to are the products of a mind of a god?
They're spoken to the prophets of Yahweh, who people call prophets of the living God, Isaiah, Hosea.
No.
I'm
asking what evidence. I'm asking what evidence you have. You can say that this was spoken to the prophets, but you have no evidence that any god communicated this information to any human being.
Oh, so in other words, you wanted a recorded video of Yahweh coming down, walking around, and talking.
I don't think that's what he said.
I didn't say anything at all about a recorded. I didn't say anything at all about a recorded video. I literally asked you what evidence. Would you stop fucking trying to talk over me? It is never, ever.
Stop trying to fucking make a faggot ass.
Boom! Gotcha, you lying little bitch. I knew it was going to happen. I'm just sitting here trying to maintain my zen, and I knew your hateful, bigoted ass was going to do exactly that. Nobody can hear you, you dumb fuck who doesn't even know how your fucking phone works while you call in to spew your fucking hate-filled fucking ignorance. Nobody can hear you. I've still got you on hold. You know what? I'm going to put you back in the queue. I've noted down your IP address. So now you know how to reset your IP address. Because now I know whenever it comes from that IP address, which I've now copied and pasted, that it's another hateful, homophobic, bigoted, ignorant pile of human fucking refuge. Not refuge, but refuse. How you feeling now, Avon?
Oh,
goodbye,
please.
bitch.
You got a fucking mic.
Goodbye, bitch.
Wow, that devolved quickly right there. Like I didn't expect that kind of free fall into bigotry.
It's amazing. And it's funny. And I said this before, and we even did I know there's a clip that got popular because of this. When you're watching these shows and you listen to what they don't answer. What they don't answer tells you more in some cases than what they do answer. And so when I say, hey, what's the evidence that, his name is A-Ban, and he just got a ban. What's your evidence that this book that you're referencing is in any way tied to the mind of a god? Oh, well, it's, what God spoke to the prophets. Okay, that's a claim. That's not the evidence. This is pretty straightforward.
Yeah. And I kind of asked the question just in a slightly different way whenever this pops up too. I usually ask, well, how can we discern between some, asshole just making shit up and actually being given a message by God? So, I mean, I asked the same question you do, just in a little bit different way.
Yeah. And evidently that person was in chat.
Oh, I see.
Don't be mad, y'all idiots can't defend the Matthew to Revelation Bible shit book. Well,
we wouldn't defend that.
Yeah. I
Also-
don't need
know
to
what
be
that
mad
means.
that I can't defend your nonsense.
His username in chat is constructed like the mispronunciation of Yahweh that he keeps saying, where the
Yeah.
W is
Yahweh.
capitalized for Yahweh.
It was that way. The call screener typed it all in there. I think he was very specific in wanting it a certain way. But, it's fun because now I've got the name and the fake name and the online name and the IP address of another little bigot who, instead of being able to defend what they actually believe and presenting evidence for it, just called in to give me money. That's all you did. You just made me another $100 probably, because I might even make an extra clip saying, hey, where are the real theists calling in? So this person who's afraid, a little coward who's afraid to say New Testament and has to say the Matthew to Revelation book, which isn't a book, it's a collection of books. It's so weird, the things that people are afraid to say while they're throwing out homophobic epithets. It's just let's get on to something real. David in Missouri is calling. Pronouns are he, him. He's a questioning theist who wants to explain why he believes in God. So, David, you're on with John and Matt. Which God do you believe in and why? And do you think anybody else should?
Hi, Matt. Hi, John. Long-time listener, first-time caller. A little nervous. I'm sorry if that goes on. A little nervous with that. So I think that I was trying to put my thoughts into words here. Maybe you can kind of help me out a little bit as I'm going here. I would say that the reason that I believe in God is actually more of a fear. So I would say you could call it the fear of hell, or you could call it kind of a Pascal's wager, a combination of those two. Sure. In terms of, I think that I would totally agree with everything that you've said in so many of your talks, anything you said, that if God does exist, he's a piece of shit. Totally would agree with that. I think that the thing that keeps me believing, if you could call it that, is that maybe that God actually does exist, and maybe he just is a piece of shit, but I don't want to end up in hell, so I need to just go with it and believe, just because I don't want to end up in hell for eternity. That might be the best way.
Oh, go ahead, John.
Well, I was just going to ask, like, which set of criteria, or how do you discern the set of criteria that keeps you out of hell?
I would say, like, that I believe. Well, I'm going to say that I believe in the God of the Bible, Jehovah, I guess you could say. So the reasons that would keep you out of, so believing in Jesus, et cetera, all that stuff. Does that answer your question? I'm sorry, I didn't quite get it.
No, the problem is, which hell are you trying to avoid?
And that's kind of the other point.
Why that particular hell? Why aren't you worried about the hells of other religions?
I would say that I don't know that we can prove any of them necessarily.
Right.
So it's almost just a good.
But you're picking one, David. That's the thing. Despite I have no reason to think that any hell or any heaven that's ever been proposed by any religion is real and true. And because of that, I don't know which of those religions I should be afraid of, which hells I should be trying to avoid, which heavens I should be trying to attain. And I have no way of knowing what criteria will keep me out of any of those hells or send me to any of those heaven. And yet you seem to have picked one when I don't see a mechanism by which we could pick one.
Yeah, and I would say that's where the entire Pascal's wager thing of what I mentioned earlier, if I'm using the term correctly, and I'm sorry if I'm not.
You are, but I would say that how do you know that it is your particular Christian version of hell, this which would be denominational as far as I can tell? How do you know it's why are you protecting yourself against that particular version of hell? Why aren't you also similarly concerned about, let's say, the Zoroastrian version of hell? It's Zoroastrianism has a version of burning hell that you're sent to, in the afterlife if you don't follow Zoroaster. So do you also follow Zoroaster or any of the other religions? Just curious.
No, absolutely I do not. And I'd say that because some of that is, I would fully admit it's because of where I've grown up. I grew up in the United States where it's predominantly Christian. And I don't believe that you could have, I believe that every God is mutually exclusive. So therefore maybe it's kind of a math bet. That's what I'm saying, the Pascal's wager thing of just saying that maybe I'll pick one and hope that the one that I have is the right one.
Okay.
And I believe that's probably faulty, but please explain it to me.
Sure. So Pascal's wager, first of all, only compares a particular version of Christianity with the absence of any religion at all. It's completely a false dichotomy. And the reality is, if you are picking Christian hell number 1 to avoid, and you have no way to distinguish whether that one's more likely than Christian hell number 2, Christian hell number 7, Christian hell number 83, then your reasoning for seeking to avoid Christian hell number 1 is equally applicable to each of those other hells that you're not avoiding. And so the real math is, if each one of those has their own criteria for getting the good afterlife and avoiding the bad afterlife, if all of those have their different criteria and you pick the wrong one, you're fucked. But if you pick none of them, you are either perhaps just as fucked, or it may be the case that there's a being who's not going to punish you for picking the wrong one. Maybe the test is, don't make a decision unless you have sufficient reason to warrant it. If there's a God that rewards intellectual integrity, I'm golden because I genuinely sought gods. I genuinely investigated gods. And rather than saying, you know what, I'm just going to go with the one that I was raised to believe because that one's really popular and the people around me believe it, and you got to make a decision and I got to bet on one, so I'm just going to bet on this one. Instead of doing that, I said, no, that one I was raised with has no more evidence for it, no more reason to believe it than any of the rest of them. And I would rather not pick one and have the one that turns out to be right, if one of them does turn out to be right, explain to me how I did anything wrong, rather than saying, oh, you picked, because let's say there's 10 doors and behind 9 of the doors, there's a bad guy who's going to stab you in the face the second you open the door. And one of the doors leads on to an Elysian field of wonderful grass and perfect weather. Which door are you going to open? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10? And what's the reason? You don't have to answer that, because absent any information, all of those doors are equal to you. And what if it turns out that several of those doors don't have behind them what somebody said is behind them? If we have no way of deciding, why wouldn't the right decision be, I'm not picking a door?
And I would, I guess I would tend to agree with you there. I guess it's more so the way that I look at it is that I guess I don't look at it as you're always saying there are 1,000 different denominations of Christianity. I guess I don't necessarily look at it like that. I look at it as maybe it's Christianity versus Hinduism versus Islam.
How is that different? How is that different? Whether the nine doors are 7 versions of Christianity, 1 version of Hinduism, or 2 versions of Christianity and 7 versions of Hinduism, it doesn't matter. It's the same.
Well, I would say that it changes you could say math in that scenario. If there's 3 things versus a million things, you have a better chance of picking one out of the 3 than you do the 1 out of a million.
Wow, you are exceptionally good at rationalizing, David.
I mean, I would say whatever number that you can come up with, it's always that number plus 1, because there's a chance that the God that does exist, if he does exist, we just haven't defined yet. So he could have some weird unknown criteria. Like you could have to, stand on your head on Sundays, and that's how you get into heaven, and nobody would know that. So everybody's just been going to hell the entire time.
But the thing is, what's wrong with not accepting any of them?
That, again, well, there's nothing wrong with it. I'll say that. If there is something wrong with it, it would be that you could, like I said earlier, that you can maybe that the Christian God is right, and if you don't select it, then the reasons that I've already stated, and you say that it's faulty, so that's fair.
Yeah. I mean, if you have no way of figuring out which proposed afterlife model is correct, then it would seem to me that it would always be a mistake to decide model 1 is the one I'm going with, as opposed to 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, when they are all mathematically equivalent. And you don't have any more evidence for 1 than 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6.
Then in that scenario, I guess I would just say that we have more evidence, and I'm not going to say that we necessarily do, but I would, because I've grown up in a place that I think I've been kind of indoctrinated to believe that I have more evidence for the Jehovah God than I do for a God that values the logic, as you might have said earlier, or Islam, or something like that.
If you grew up in a house where everybody told you that left was right and right is left, wouldn't you have more evidence that left is right and right is left than someone who didn't grow up with that indoctrination?
Yeah.
Yeah. And does that in any way tell you what the right answer is?
No, absolutely not.
Yeah. So if we don't have a path to the right answer, I can't make a decision.
Right.
Well, I'm kind of curious sitting here. Well, yeah, I'm still kind of curious as to why you, even though you acknowledge like everything that we've said here, why do you still believe in God just to avoid the one particular version of hell? Or is that something that you're trying to work through?
That's something I'm trying to work through. It is. It's absolutely something I'm trying to work through right now.
Okay.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. I will call back. I have other topics that I could talk about, but I will have to wait another time for that. I don't want to stay up all the time. Thank you for your help, guys.
Cool. Thanks, David.
Thanks for calling in.
Please feel free to call back. There's also a Sunday show after dark, by the way. That's it's worth me doing the advertisements. You're watching the Sunday show today with myself and John Gleason. There's a Sunday show after dark that's happening starting at 7 p.m. Central. Or wait. Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
With Paulogia and Eric from Skeptics and Scoundrels. On Monday, there's Skeptalk right here on this exact same network with Aron Ra and Professor Dave. Tuesday's Chewed Gum is going to be Eve and Alyssa. Wednesday's Hang Up, it was supposed to be me and Dara the Magic Skeptic, but it's going to be Seth Andrews and Dara the Magic Skeptic. So when you tune in on Wednesday, you will not see me. And you can celebrate that. These two get to take my show and do pretty much whatever the hell they want with it. And you can make that a success or, whatever. You could be like A-Ban. On Thursday's Translated Call-In show at 2 p.m. Central is going to be Josie and Luxander again. Great show from last week. We're going to continue that on next week as well. Next Sunday's Sunday show at 2 is going to be myself and I'm told Jimmy Snow. I mean, how do you not look forward to that? And after that, there's a Sunday show after dark next week with Aron Ra and Adair. So you've got some A names ready for next week. But today it's me and John, and then Paul and Eric. We got a caller I want to get to. This one is interesting to me for a number of different reasons. But Harper's calling, pronouns are they, them, has a question about whether and how they should tell their atheist parents they're a Christian. What's going on, Harper? Sorry.
Yeah. Hey, how you guys doing?
Doing all right.
Good.
Yeah. So are you guys parents?
I am not.
I am.
Okay, John. So I'm assuming you're raising your kid to be an atheist.
I have not had that in mind. I've allowed him to make up his own mind about it. He says that he's an atheist, but I've never pushed him in any kind of direction. I've actually told him in the past when he was younger that he's a little bit too young to actually consider these kinds of questions, and I don't push one position on him one way or another.
Okay.
I tell him that, if you have questions, I'm here to answer them, and I'll tell you what I think about it, but I leave it open for him to make his own decisions.
Yeah. Okay. I think I was raised in a fairly similar manner to how you're currently raising your kid. My parents were very hands off, so they grew up in religious households, but they had bad experiences. So they didn't necessarily want to raise me in that, but I've now found my way to Jesus myself. So I'm wondering how you would react if your kid got saved.
Well, so I mean, if my son came to me and told me, "Hey, I've become Christian," I would show him nothing but support. If I wouldn't, chastise him or anything, I would tell him if that's what you believe, then that's what you believe, and I would do my best to support him in that without, compromising my own values. If he ended up in a rather bigoted version of Christianity, I would definitely at least try to steer him, in a better direction, because there's many different versions of Christianity out there right now, and there's no reason why he has to be part of that particular version. But that's more of a humanistic kind of thing for me to do, I guess, or I want to point him in a more humanistic route. It's not necessarily that I have a problem with him like being a Christian or believing in God. It's more about the fact that I want to raise him to treat, people well and treat people in a good way, and treat people equally, that kind of stuff. And so, I mean, it really kind of depends on the type of Christianity that he were to fall into, but I would never tell him stop believing, kind of thing.
Yeah, I can speak for myself. I am a Bible believer, so you would probably say that my beliefs are problematic. I believe so. Yeah, how would you react to that if your kid said, I'm not going to compromise on these biblical positions I have. God spoke these to the world, and I'm not going to compromise. Would you disown your kid?
I want to be very emphatic about this. I will never disown my kid. My kid will always be my kid, and he'll always be welcome in my home. But I would not allow such attitudes to be uttered like in my presence. I would definitely any advice that I would give him, or if he becomes prominent or something like that, I would definitely tell him how I felt about the rhetoric that they spouted, and I would be honest with him and tell him how horrible those ideas are. I would never directly attack him and his character. But I would definitely not hold back on telling him how bad those ideas were, and I would continuously always strive to at least point him into a more humanistic route.
Oh, wow. That makes sense. I haven't yet told my parents, so I'm kind of going through the possible scenarios that could happen. I am afraid of getting disowned. Like I said, my parents they tend to mock religious people a lot, kind of similar to how Matt operates. So I guess, Matt, how would you react if you had a kid and they told you they were religious?
I'd want to know what they believe and why. Same as I do for anybody else. And by the way, I don't think your characterization's accurate about mocking the religious. I'm happy to mock God because I don't think any God exists. I'm happy to mock ideas and concepts, but I don't merely mock religious people for being religious. I'll mock an idiot all day long for being an idiot, but that's not what I think about religious people in general. Like I used to be a Christian. I didn't get smarter, or my IQ didn't go up. I don't think I was stupid then. I don't think I was mentally ill. What I had at that time was a collection of beliefs that I thought were warranted, and then I later found out they aren't warranted. So if I had a kid or anybody that was close to me that I cared about, my niece, nephew, whatever else, if they said, "Hey, I'm a Christian," I'd say, "Okay, if you want to talk about it, I'm here to talk about it." And I would want to know what they believe and why they believe it, because there is, like, I could be wrong, but I spent the last 20 years actively talking to people about this. And to date, despite taking calls from literally thousands of people and engaging in, I don't know how many dozens of debates with some of the better apologists on the planet, as well as some random clueless individuals, not one person has presented a reasonable case for the existence of a God. And so if my kid came to me and said, "Oh, I believe God's real," I'd be like, "Okay, why?"
Yeah. Okay.
Why
Thanks
do
for
you
your guys'
believe?
time, I think. Yeah.
Why do you believe, Harper?
Yeah, I've watched a lot of YouTube debates for the past year or so. I think what's convincing me most is just the cumulative case. I've watched, yeah. So I would say it's a multitude of things.
Do you know why I would hear you say that and think that's a complete cop-out?
Yeah.
So if somebody says, "Why do I believe in evolution?" do you think I'd ever say, "Oh, I think I've watched a lot of YouTube videos and I think I'm going to go with the cumulative case"?
I mean, you're not an academic, so I wouldn't expect you to do any more than that, really.
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand it.
I said you're not an academic, so I wouldn't expect you to do a deep dive into things beyond the YouTube videos.
Okay, well, that's kind of completely not the point. When I say, "What reason do you have for believing something?" and you say the cumulative case, you haven't told me a thing. You haven't provided any evidence.
Okay.
You've just said, "There's a lot of reasons." Well, cool.
I'll give you one of the reasons.
Cool.
Okay.
I think I've never heard a good rebuttal to Jay Dyer's transcendental argument for God.
Okay, let me ask you this, rather than me pointing out that Dyer's an idiot. Does the fact that you've never heard a good rebuttal to something mean that it's true?
No, I've looked for rebuttals to it. So
No, that's
you
not.
know,
Hang on. Does the fact that you've not heard a good rebuttal to something mean that it's true?
Of course not.
Of course not. And yet the one thing you decided to list is that you've never heard a good rebuttal to Jay Dyer's argument. Well, you, by your own admission, your first reason is flawed, logically flawed, irrational. And so you went from, "Hey, there's a cumulative case," to, okay, I'll give you one. And the first one you picked is, by your own admission, irrational. Do you see why I got a problem?
Yeah, I don't think I need to exhaustively prove. I don't think I need to exhaustively look through every counter argument. So if you know a good counter argument to Jay Dyer's position, then I'd love to hear that.
Well, Harper, I've already debated Jay Dyer, but here's the thing. You're still missing the point. And the point is that you offered up a fallacious reason. That's it. You offered up a fallacious reason. Nothing else, no other evidence. Because whether or not you've heard a good rebuttal is completely separate from whether or not there is a good rebuttal. And I wasn't suggesting that you need to go do an exhaustive research, because you could exhaustively search the entire world and never find a good rebuttal to that argument. And it still would not in any way demonstrate that that argument is true, that the conclusion is true, or that it is reasonable to accept that argument is true. That's not the way argumentation works. You have shifted the burden of proof. You've shifted the burden of proof. You've heard Jay say something, and because you didn't find anything that was particularly compelling, you're just going to go with what Jay thinks. All of that is 100% fallacious. You are shifting the burden of proof. You are accepting an argument not because it demonstrated with evidence that it was true, but you are accepting it because you haven't found anybody who could rebut it yet. All of that is a fallacy. And so right off the bat, you went from, I believe, okay, I'll give you one piece of evidence, and your first piece of evidence is completely fallacious at every turn. Given that, I would humbly, although some people will say it's not humbly at all, but I would humbly submit that your ability to assess logical arguments is demonstrably flawed and inferior, and therefore you're not qualified currently to determine that Jay's argument should be reasonably accepted. You need to do more work.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate you guys' time.
Cool. Thanks, Harper.
Thanks for calling in.
Okay.
And good luck.
Bye.
You know, I mean, if you tell your parents, I hope it goes well for you. I will say that's easily the first time I've had that particular call.
Yeah.
My parents are atheists. Should I tell them I'm not?
I mean, you know, I feel like in general, most atheist parents wouldn't be bigoted towards their child. But I mean, then again, you know, it doesn't, like, just because you're an atheist doesn't mean you're not also a dickhead or a poor, you know, parent. So, I mean,
I have a slightly different take on stuff.
Oh, do you?
Sorry. Well, I'm not a parent. And so I have to extend this to, for example, like my niece and nephew. I love my niece and nephew to pieces. They will always be my niece and nephew. I will always love them. There will always be some safe space here for them. That said, if either of them turned out to be a terrible homophobic, transphobic bigot, whether they attributed it to their religious views or not, they might find themselves not welcome in my home for anything other than, you know, hey, there's an emergency, there's something like this. You know, I don't need to have that in my house at all. I would still offer them a place to stay if they needed it, you know, if there was a need. But if you're just going to come over and hang out, you know, like we're having a family gathering at my house, and your views, whether they come from your religion, whatever, are just terrible and transphobic, I don't give a shit if you're my mother, my father, my brother, my child, my niece, my nephew. You better keep your fucking mouth shut if you want to stay in the house for this gathering, because that shit ain't happening here. You're not going to make this bad for everybody else. And yet it doesn't change the fact that, you know, if that same person, whoever in my family with the terrible ideas and views came to me and said, hey, I'm homeless. I got no place else to stay. Can I stay with you? The answer is yes, absolutely. Let's go get the guest room ready. I've got snakes in quarantine in your bathroom. I'll move them out to somewhere else so that you can actually have that bathroom and this. But there's still going to be, some limitations. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say I disagreed, because I'm not suggesting that, you wouldn't do similar. I don't buy the notion that because we're blood relatives, that somehow automatically buys someone my respect or some aspect of my life.
Mm-hmm. No, I was good.
So.
Yeah. I was going to say that, that was when I was talking to Harper, I was like, I wouldn't allow that kind of talk in my house. So like if my son, for some reason, decided he was going to be a bigot and would only talk about bigoted things, then he's basically electing to not allow himself in my house. So that wouldn't be me not allowing him. That's him refusing to adhere to, my house's rules about it. And therefore he would be, putting himself out in that particular sense. So, I mean, I agree with you about like all the rhetoric and everything like that. It wouldn't be welcome in my home either.
Yeah. It's like, you can go take a walk. You can come back when everybody else is gone and the party's over, and sleep if you need to, but all right. We have, whoops, I almost clicked the wrong button right there. We have Dave in India. Pronouns are he, him, calling. It's evidently got a proof for a god. Dave, you're on with Matt and John. Which god are we proving and how?
We are proving the general god.
Okay.
And the existence of ether points towards it.
The existence of ether points towards a general god?
Yes.
How are you defining ether? Because there is a term ether that's tied to like chemistry. It's a type of compound. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. How does a chemical compound point to the existence of a god?
When you experience it inside your body, you use the compound to experience ether, but it's present everywhere. It's universal.
Would you in English, would you spell ether with an A, like AETHER, or just the ETHER?
I'm sorry, I'm not that well versed in linguistics, but
okay.
I use E for it. I use the E one.
That's fine.
Oh, okay.
So what I was saying is, how does ether prove that there's a god? And then you said something like, when you experience it, it's because of the ether. What is it we're experiencing? Can you give me a better idea of how ether proves a god?
So there are like 5 elements in your body, and one of those elements is space. And if you want to, and space has no properties. So if you want to experience that, you can experience that in your neck. And there are different techniques, like meditation techniques, which can lead to that particular path.
Hold on. You go back to space has no properties. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. Like, even in a vacuum.
It doesn't make sense to me. You said there's like 5, your body's made up of 5 things and one of them space.
Yeah, like fire, water, earth, and the basic 5 elements.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, but
that's not what my body's made of, and nobody's thought that for thousands of years.
If there's fire inside of you, call 911, please.
Yeah.
So I'm talking about the principles, and you are talking about the attribute.
I'm talking about reality. I'm talking about reality, and in reality, there's not fire in my fucking body.
Oh, wait, are you talking about the fire that I get after I eat Taco Bell? I only feel that once I have to go to the restroom.
Dave, are you just joking? Is this a big waste of time? Because
No,
you called
no.
in, you say you're a theist and that the existence of ether proves God. And then you start talking about how our bodies are made up of earth, fire, water. This antiquated concept of the essentials is false. And so what I asked you, though, was how does the existence of ether prove a God? I want you to answer that question. You don't have to tell me that my body is made up of shit that it's not made up of. I need you to tell me how ether proves that there's a God.
But because the dielectric induction of electricity happens in ether, that's where the potential is created and transmitted.
What
and
does
that's why
that
it's universal.
Dave, do you understand how to structure a logical argument to demonstrate the truth of something? Because if the argument is ether proves God, nothing you just said included the word God at all. In order for there to be an argument for the existence of God, God has to be one of the terms in the argument.
Energy is God, and that is what propagates through ether.
Okay.
Ether is the medium through it.
No, Dave, I do not accept your assertion that energy is God. I have energy, I have electricity. I'm getting ready to add 2 new circuits to the garage. There will be energy in those circuits. That energy is not anything that I can identify as a God.
Well, and also the ether has been disproved for a long time. There is no other area of like reality that you're talking about with this ether, which is actually in English is spelled starting with an A, the one that you're talking about, at least.
Tesla already figured out how to transmit electricity wirelessly using the ether.
It wasn't using ether.
Dave, we don't need to know anything at all about Tesla. I'm trying to say, you called in to say that the existence of ether proves God. I'll give you $1,000 if you can construct a valid and sound syllogism that begins with ether exists and concludes with therefore God exists. It's not possible to do.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not as knowledgeable as you all are, but just based on what I could transmit.
Yeah. If you're just saying energy is God, what is the justification for saying that energy is God? All energy, heat energy, light energy, electricity, all of those are energy. Are they all God? What makes them God?
The fact that they use ether as the medium for their action in this universe.
Okay. So now what you've done is gone completely circular. You're claiming that ether proves that God exists. And you just said that when I said what makes energy God, and you're saying it's God because it uses ether. So now your entire argument is circular, which is a fallacy. So you have failed to construct a logical syllogism. I'm still wondering, Dave, how can I know that energy is God? And by energy, do you mean any and all energy, heat, electricity, etc.?
So I can give one reference. In India, they were able, like
Why
many
can't you
years
just
ago,
answer
they
my
were
question? Well, I don't need a reference from India. I need you to answer the question that I asked you. What when you're talking about energy being God, do you mean all energy? Is heat energy God? Is electricity God? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. What makes heat energy God? What is it about heat energy that qualifies it to be considered God?
It can provide warmth in a cold weather. It can cook your food.
So, Dave, is something that can provide warmth and cook your food, is that the criteria that we use to determine if it's a God?
It makes our experience of life easier and more.
That's not what I asked. Okay, is something a God if it makes our life easier?
Yes.
I do not accept your definition of God. I find it absolutely useless and ridiculous. This towel makes my life easier by giving me something to wipe the screen off with other than my hand. Under no circumstances do I find it reasonable to say that because this towel makes my life easier, therefore this towel is God. I find that to be utterly stupid.
Towel is the attribute which is derived from the principle, and the principle is God.
So now you're saying that God is a principle. I don't accept that either. Let me ask you this, Dave. Is there a God that exists as a thinking agent at all?
Yes.
Okay. Then it's not a concept if it's a thinking agent. So how do we communicate with that thinking agent?
You get all the data from the environment into your body. It can be through eyes, ears, touch. Once you have the data, you use the principle to make a decision that will be much better based on the data that you received. But you are not consciously choosing that. You just took the data, then prayed to God, and God helped you make that better decision.
What question
is this
did I just
Jordan
ask
Peterson?
you?
Sorry.
I'm wondering what question did I just ask you, because I guarantee you what you just said is not in any way an answer to the question I asked. Okay. Dave, we're going to move on. Thanks so much for calling.
Okay, sure. Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
I did want to mention two people. The Michelson-Morley experiment disproved ether, and I feel like his entire argument was based on this whole idea of ether existing, and the Michelson-Morley experiment proved that it was not real. Like it didn't exist. It was once theorized that light traveled through a medium called the ether.
Yeah,
but that's it's a dead concept. So I don't even know why he was trying to base his entire argument on it.
Yeah, and I can appreciate the fact asking how are you spelling that. So the AETER, that thing is nonsense. It's I got the vapors, or it's tied to the same flawed notion as the notion that there's fire and water and earth that are the basic elements. That's just not true. But within organic chemistry, there's a group of compounds that are called ethers, and ether just spelled ETHER. And so I didn't want to go to ether's not real only to have it be no, I'm talking about this. And since he talked about the dielectric aspect of this, that is tied to ethers. So it's very
well. I felt like he was mixing up. Yeah, I felt like the caller was mixing up different concepts of ether, because like I could tell that he was actually talking about the chemical compound, but then at the same time he was talking about how it moves through the ether, like it's all around us and everything like that, and like that's mixing in the AETHER ether, and
Yeah.
so I don't know.
Yeah, I think there may be some conflation of a couple different ideas, or I don't know. But when we're sitting here talking about it, and I'm like, what makes something a god? Now, like, I guess I should be clear, because this come up a lot. People are like, "Oh, Matt, you're on a show where you're asking people to defend their God belief." Yes, but first I'd like to ask them to define their God belief, and then to defend it, define and defend. Boom, boom, boom. That said, I don't have in my head a little box of God must fit into this box with these properties. I have a lot of different boxes, and each God concept that I've been presented with, either through my own religious training, my own independent study of looking up different views of religion, or the various callers I've had over the year, you can just imagine there's a different box, and I just stick those God concepts in each of those boxes. Dave's God concept is a useless one. God is anything that makes your life easier. Okay, let's just throw that out, because if I said, "Ooh, I believe in God because I believe in things that make your life easier," I'm going to look like an idiot, because genuinely nobody talks about believing in God in those terms. There are people who do. Don't get me wrong. I'm not doubting Dave's sincerity that he has a God concept that he finds particularly useful, but he's conflating the concept with anything that can make your life better, anything that is energy. And then at the end of it, Dave still thinks that God is a thinking agent. That is a being. So now you have something that is a being, and it's a concept, and it's anything that helps make your life better. And it's, once you've defined God so broadly, you are no longer talking about any sort of distinct item that we can, latch on and talk about at all.
Yeah, I got a lot of hints of Jordan Peterson in the way that he was trying to describe the concept of God.
Yeah. Here's a fun one for the two of us. Eli in Austria is calling, pronouns are he, him, about whether or not Jesus existed. So welcome, Eli. You're on with one mythicist and one non-mythicist, who I'm going to bet answer this question almost the same.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Matt. Hi, John. And hi, Arden. That's also why I'm calling. So I'm also a long-time listener, first-time caller. I'm going to keep this short. This topic actually came up from me talking to a colleague of mine who is a JW. And after talking about our epistemology, we switched to just reading the Bible together to get each other's perspective. And I talked a lot about the historicity of the Bible when we read through Matthew. And then she asked me about if I think that the historical character of Jesus ever existed. And I don't really hold a strong opinion. I know that most scholars agree that we have evidence that he did. I know there's also some evidence that he might have not existed or might be based on several individuals. But to keep it short, if we would indeed know, quote unquote, that a historical Jesus existed, like in the way we know that Alexander the Great existed, should this have any impact on how we view and read and understand the New Testament?
I mean, for me, as far as in general goes, as far as whether or not Jesus existed, I don't think it matters. Like, especially for a lot of conversations concerning like the historicity of the New Testament, as far as like arguments for like resurrection and stuff like that. Now, if you're wanting to have a conversation about Christian origins specifically, and like what we can know is historical in the New Testament, or what most likely traces back to some kind of historical event or anything like that, I think that the question of whether or not Jesus was a historical person is important. But I could draw, a similar distinction to like the Old Testament in the patriarchs. Like to understand the Old Testament, what it teaches and everything like that, the context of it and everything, do we need to really be concerned with whether or not Moses or Abraham or any of them were historical people? I don't think that particular aspect of the Old Testament is important to the larger conversation of like the message and the story and everything like that in the Old Testament. But as far as like the origins of the religion and how it started and everything like that, I think that's a very important question. And I would have the exact same opinion about the New Testament. So I don't know. My position, I guess, is maybe a little nuanced on it because of that.
And I would say that to the exact question you asked, Eli, which is if we knew that there was a real person at the heart of this story, would that change anything about how we view the doctrine? That fact on its own, I don't think would have any impact on how I view the doctrine. If you could demonstrate that the fact that the aspects of his life that are talked about also actually happened, not just that he existed and was a person, but did he turn water into wine? Did he heal a blind person? Did he, was he crucified and rose from the dead? That might impact quite strongly how I'm going to look at different things about the doctrine. But at the end of the day, the reason it matters is because if Jesus existed and said, I am the way, the truth, and life, and portrayed himself as the actual conduit, co-equal to God, then his existence absolutely matters to the doctrine. You can't separate the two. If there was no Jesus, Christianity is fucking dead. It's one of the reasons I my mythicist friends, I think, go too far in what they say sometimes. But at the end of the day, the reason why it's worth pointing this out is Christians absolutely cannot demonstrate that Jesus even existed. That's just at best a reasonable inference that comes from how we normally treat proposed figures from sketchy history, but they can't demonstrate it. And that to me is damning enough. At no point should anybody be required to prove that Jesus didn't exist. The mere fact that if Christianity is true, Jesus is the single most important figure who has ever been on earth. No doubt about it. No, nothing. He is, according to the doctrine, God, part of the Godhead, part of potentially the Trinity. I know there's people who throw out various things there, and it was invented in like 325 at the Council of Nicaea type thing. But when you have a doctrine that is tied to the truth and reality of a person, then that person's existence matters. All of Christianity crumbles and falls if there is no Jesus. And how can a God set up a world system where that single person, him incarnate, is the most essential and most important person ever, and the facts of that individual's life are the most critical, and by most models of Christianity, whether or not you mentally assent to Jesus is God, Jesus is Lord, is critical to salvation, to soteriology. And then for that God to fail to give sufficient evidentiary warrant to even conclude that he existed, let alone the other facts of his life, I think it's damning on its face. I think it's as close to obviously true that Christianity is false as we're going to get. And at no point does it require us demonstrating that Jesus doesn't exist. Their inability to demonstrate that he does or did, or that any of the aspects of his life are true, it takes them out at their knees.
Yeah. I'm having a hard time sometimes when I talk to theists. I talk to a lot of JWs because they're around here. When they ask me if I think that Jesus was a historical character or not, they seem surprised when I say I don't think it matters, and I often do grant them that it's possible, it's likely that he was a historical character, but then they immediately think, well, that means that I grant them that he was the Messiah, and that's just not the same thing between Jesus of Nazareth and Jesus Christ. So for me, are two different concepts, and it's a bit difficult to get this over to a theist.
Yeah, I hear you.
I would say that having the conversation over the historicity of Jesus, like just whether or not it was historical, you're going to have a really tough time with that. And really the question of Jesus's historicity, is best had between people that aren't, dogmatically attached to the idea of Jesus, because I mean, as far as JWs go, I do believe, they're going to believe in a literal, like, gospel version of Jesus, which would be a magical version of Jesus and all this other stuff. And I feel like most atheists would definitely be like, well, that Jesus didn't exist. And so I do see, like, a lot of people trying to, like, create common ground at the start of a conversation and be like, oh, well, I agree that there was a itinerant rabbi. And I do that a lot on occasion, just to be able to have the conversation that they want to have, like over the resurrection or any other kind of tenet of Christianity. And I think for the most part, that's what's going to happen, especially in religious conversations. A lot of people like to portray mythicists as just hopelessly dependent on the idea that Jesus did not exist, like, at all. And that I feel like that's just simply not the case. And at least not for me. If there is anybody out there that's hopelessly dependent on the argument, well, Jesus didn't exist, therefore, Christianity is there's no point in even addressing, like, the resurrection or whatnot. I wouldn't do that personally, just because I like having the conversation, like, about the resurrection and the historicity of all the evidence that goes into that. So, like, in order to have that conversation, I have to make compromises on my end. And the only time that I really get into the conversation is when I'm having a conversation with, like, another atheist or an agnostic person. Those are the best times to have it, because you're not helplessly tied to this magical version of Jesus at that point.
Yeah, I'm pretty confident that George Washington existed, but that doesn't tell me anything at all about whether he couldn't tell a lie or whether he chopped down a cherry tree. So the existence of the person and the potential stories that surround that person are two completely separate issues. And for most, it doesn't matter. Like whether or not Socrates was an invention of Plato or a real person, or Plato was an invention of Socrates or a real person, or vice versa, or however, doesn't matter, because the ideas that Plato and or Socrates or anybody else express stand and fall on their own merits. The concepts presented are either true or not true, completely independent of the person. There's nothing about, David Hume. If we found out tomorrow that David Hume didn't exist, the writings that are attributed to him that convey ideas, those ideas live and fall on their own merits. They are not in any way dependent on whether or not David Hume existed. That's not true for somebody like Jesus, somebody who is a Godhead messianic figure who is saying, I came, I inhabited human form, I healed the sick, I'm here for the forgiveness of sins, I died, was resurrection, ascended to heaven. All of those things are tied to the actual person in a way that virtually no other claim ever has been or could be. And so in that case, it's a special case in that his existence is a necessary component of the doctrine being true. But the doctrine might be true independent of whether or not we have reason to believe he existed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just one last thing. I grew up Catholic, and as a kid, I I was told, well, the Pope is the representative of God on earth. And I know the Pope exists. I can't know that he talks to God or is representative of anything that is described as God. But yeah, I'm not going to take up any more of your time. Thank you very much. Been a big pleasure talking to you, big fan. And when LineCon happens, I'm planning to fly in from Europe to meet up.
Awesome.
Oh, that's cool.
Well, we will stay tuned because we'll definitely announce when that's going to happen. Thanks so much for the call, Eli. I appreciate it. We have one final caller on today's daytime episode of the Sunday Show, but don't forget there is I almost feel like we need to cut a special promo for it's the Sunday Show after dark. Get that going on. Hey, who's going to be on the Sunday Show after dark? Well, Paulogia will be here today along with Eric from Skeptics and Scoundrels. You should tune in at 7 p.m. Central for more wonderful calls on the Sunday Show after dark. I just enjoy being silly on occasion. So today, calling from Poland and having waited for over an hour to get through, thank you so much for your patience. Mark, pronouns are he, him, and it just says evolution and original sin. So what do you got for us, Mark?
Hey, because I've been watching The Line and your channel and Forrest Valkai, and I've heard multiple arguments against like Bible and Catholic God, but I've never heard anyone talk about original sin and evolution. So in Bible, it says that in the beginning, Earth was basically a paradise, that animals lived in peace and didn't kill each other. They all eat green plants for food, it said in Bible. And basically now, since we know that the evolution happened, that they were like millions of years before humans, animals that were killing each other, like dinosaurs and this type of things. And I wonder why no one is taking this as a point. Is it a weak point? Because I don't think it's like a small contradiction. Because if there was no original sin and heaven never was, earth never was a paradise, then there was no need for Jesus and there is no explanation for evil.
Yeah. So I don't know what you're hearing. To me, this isn't about just evolution and original sin. When you look at Genesis, the creation story lists a number of facts that are clearly inconsistent with what science has to say about the world. And that puts Christians and Jews in a position of saying, oh, either science is wrong or Genesis isn't meant to be taken literally. It is metaphorical. It's an allegory. It's not about two actual people. It's about, it's very difficult to get them to make this story make any sense absent being a literal story, because you're like, oh, well, if there wasn't a Garden of Eden and there wasn't an Adam and Eve, then where does original sin come into it? Why is there any need for us to be saved? Where did sin and death come in if that didn't actually happen? And what some theists will actually do is say it's a true story that is relayed in a way that is not specific enough. It's like evolution happened, but God came in and tinkered. And while there may not have been an actual literal Garden of Eden, there were God's chosen people that, he began with, and they sinned against him and rebelled. And so the reality, Mark, as far as I can tell, is in much the same way that nobody has ever been able to reconcile all the various Easter accounts of, what was at the tomb, who went to the tomb, what was there, was the stone already rolled away, was there an angel sitting inside the tomb, was there an angel sitting outside the tomb? All these things are different in the different gospels, and nobody's reconciled that. I also don't know anybody who's truly reconciled Genesis, because you have young earth creationists who say that it's literal and science is wrong. Then you have day age creationists who say it's not literal it's mostly true, but for God, a day is like 1,000 years or something like that. And so, when it says this happened on the first day, it really means a long period of time. The problem with that is the days are in the wrong order. You've got plants and animals and things coming into the picture. Genesis is just wrong. And so there's no way to take it literally as true and justify it with the actual scientific facts. So whether you look at this as evolution versus original sin, or just the facts of the origin of life and diversity of life on Earth, the Bible's just wrong.
Yes, but I'm not saying to take it literally, because even you're saying like it could be a time span or something, not a day. I understand it, but in this case, you can't even take it metaphorically, because it is simply impossible to evil exist because of original sin, because evil existed before original sin, before humans existed, before there was a chance for original sin. So even if you take it metaphorically, that garden never existed, God manipulated evolution and this kind of stuff, it's still impossible, because it's still a case where evil things were happening before there was a chance for sin.
Like what?
Like animals killing each other.
That's not evil.
How can it be not evil? Like it says that animals were eating green plants and food. Bible can recognize that when a lion is eating a live thing. Like there are videos on YouTube where a lion is eating thing that is still alive from his butt or something like that. That is kind of evil.
What makes that evil?
You seriously don't think that it's evil to hurt animals, for them to feel pain, unnecessary pain?
I don't agree that that's what I don't agree that that's what makes something evil, nor does the Bible.
Would maybe are you trying to, instead of evil, are you trying to say suffering? Like it doesn't make sense that suffering would exist before the fall of man?
Yes, that's also because when I've watched Alex O'Connor, he said that you can defend argument against evil because people were defending it in a way that, yes, it's evil that there is unnecessary suffering, but it is because of original sin, and that's where I'm coming from.
The thing is, if you take Genesis metaphorically, how do you prove that there was any suffering or any evil prior to the fall of humans? Because if it's a metaphor, you no longer have a literal timeline.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like you're mixing up two different interpretations of Genesis, because you're trying to apply real scientific concepts to a literal understanding of Genesis. But what we've been talking about here is that if you're going to adhere to evolution, then you can't take Genesis literally. And so, I mean, you can't, I feel like you're trying to mix up these two concepts. I know I at least would agree that yes, if you adhere to evolution, then you also can't at the same time adhere to a literal understanding of Genesis.
Okay.
But if you're going to adhere to evolution, or at least accept it for the fact that it is, then you're more than likely going to interpret it metaphorically, which means that you don't have this timeline problem that you're describing here. Does that make sense?
Kinda, but it's not even a timeline. We know that it happened way before,
That's part of the timeline part.
Mark, you can't, you literally cannot say the words "it happened way before" unless you have a timeline. If you don't know, if it's all metaphor, and you don't know when mankind sinned, bringing sin and death into the world, then you can't say what happened before it.
Okay, I think you're right. Can I ask a second question about your discussion with Dinesh, or I don't know how to pronounce it, you
Dinesh
kind of
Dinesh D'Souza, yeah.
Because
Sure.
in this discussion you were talking about global warming, and you kind of granted him the fact that scientists agreed that there is gonna be another ice age and the climate is like colding, and you didn't oppose that fact. Can I finish?
No. You just said that I granted him a position that scientists said that another ice age is coming. That's not a position I hold. That I don't think I said anything to grant that. What did I say that granted that?
He was talking that in the past scientists agreed that there is going to be another ice age, and you, instead of opposing that, you said yes, science was false, but it doesn't mean that right now.
Mark, does the fact that I didn't oppose something mean I granted it?
In a discussion, it usually means that, like, if I would say,
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't fucking mean that, and I didn't do it.
So why didn't you oppose it?
Because when I'm on stage and we're talking about 20 or 30 different subjects and bouncing around, I'm constantly making decisions about what I do want to address and what I don't want to address. And as I'm not a fucking climate scientist, I'd rather address the things that I know about. The fact that I didn't say, no, you're wrong, doesn't mean I was conceding that he was correct.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yep. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Mark.
It is unbelievable. It's like, oh, you were on stage with Dinesh D'Souza and he said something false and you didn't challenge him on it. Well, first of all, not an expert in everything. Second of all, if I sat there and just started correcting Dinesh on all the things he got wrong, we never would have gotten to any fucking subject at all. The guy literally can't put 3 or 4 sentences together without being monumentally wrong. And cartoonishly so, which is why on trans issues, he started hopping around like a frog. But, you know,
yeah.
My understanding, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, I was just going to say that
it's the delay.
Yeah.
Damn it, John, why are you interrupting me? Damn it, Matt, why are you interrupting me? Is that fucking delay? No, in a conversation like that, there's so much going on. You're trying to make decisions all the time. If anybody thinks that not correcting somebody on something is a scent that they were correct, that's just nuts. But if I remember it, I'd have to go back and watch. I think that he was basically making the science has been wrong in the past about claims about the climate, which is correct. We've been wrong about all kinds of stuff. Anyway, now I will shut up.
Okay. I was just gonna, from my limited experience, I guess, and like doing debates and conversations and stuff like that. It's definitely true that, especially if they start gish galloping a whole bunch of stuff, it's really hard to address every single thing. And I've got a bad short-term memory as it is, so me being able to hold on to 1 or 2 things is usually a good day for me.
Yeah. That one, we are in the same boat there, my friend. Final call for today. Ken is calling from Tennessee, who has a comment or question. So Ken, you're on with Matt and John. Please turn down the show so that we don't hear it in the background, and welcome.
Are you talking to Ken?
Yes.
Ken.
Oh, yeah. Hi. Well, thanks for taking my call.
Yeah.
I just wanted to get your take on my feelings that Christians, when they say that it gives them peace of mind, that actually it creates greater anxiety about their salvation. I've talked to family members and acquaintances enough to sense that deep down inside they have enough doubts about the Christianity and salvation and all of that, that it does more harm for them than good.
I don't know how you can possibly quantify how much harm is being done versus how much good is being done. Because once, like, I never spend any time being anxious about my salvation. There were a few moments where it was like, ooh, if I didn't understand this before, I'm hearing us or something in the background. But
I'm on speakerphone. I wonder if that would make a difference.
yes, never be on speakerphone.
Okay.
So
I'm
in any
off
case,
speakerphone.
so in my case, maybe once or twice I had concerns about, ooh, if I got saved at 5 and I'm just now beginning to understand stuff as a teenager, was I really saved? But there was no anxiety about my salvation. I mean, I believed that I was going to heaven. That was it. Now, are there other people who constantly experience anxiety about it or frequently experience? Sure. As a matter of fact, even within the church that I went to, there was a cycle of, you're not a good enough Christian. You're not living up to, your walk with Christ isn't good enough. You're not keeping his commandments. You're not doing these things. That anxiety is there constantly. But it wasn't about whether or not it was saved. It was about whether or not I was being a good representative of Christ. I knew I was saved. What I didn't know is, what God thought of me. And, if I had sexual thoughts about somebody, does that mean that God's given me over to a reprobate mind? It wasn't about the salvation thing, but we may be talking about the same sort of thing. The problem is I have no way of quantifying how much anxiety Christianity gave me or anybody else compared to how much peace it gave me or anybody else. I think there are probably some people for whom the balance tips in the anxiety direction. And I think there are probably other people who tip in the peace direction. But in the end of the day, I don't really care. I only care if it's true. If it's true, like if I have an incurable disease, my friend Dave Warnock, if I have ALS, I'm going to have all kinds of anxiety and suffering because of the truth that I have ALS. That's completely separate from whether or not it's true. And what I care about with Christianity is whether or not it's true. I'm sure there are plenty of people who feel better and peaceful just generally. And I'm sure there's plenty of people who fake feeling peaceful and better generally. I don't know how to tell the difference because I can't read minds.
Yeah, I would say that my past. I would say that my past on this, I definitely remember the times where Christianity caused me anxiety more than any times it might have given me peace. So I would say that me looking back, I would definitely have a bias towards the anxiety part. Of course, I was a kid that grew up with anxiety issues and everything, and Christianity definitely made that worse on occasion. But I would not be able to sit here and quantify or at least compare like the amount of time I experienced peace because of Christianity versus, the times that it caused me anxiety, because I only remember the anxious parts. Like those are the things that really stuck with me. The things that are peaceful where I gained peace by thinking of something concerned with Christianity, those would not be things that would strike me as, something I needed to remember. But so I'm just saying I would totally be biased about that if I were to try to quantify it.
Well, I could, of course, be misinterpreting what I'm hearing from Christians when I've talked to them. I know that, for instance, I made the mistake of discussing it with my mother years ago, and at some point she just stopped the conversation and said, don't destroy my faith. And I realized I'd made a mistake in even talking to her about it. But it just seems to me that many of the Christians I talk to, or some of them, just seem sort of nervous about it, really. They talk about the peace of mind almost as though they're just putting up a defensive shield somehow. So
I think, yeah, I think it's nice that you're pointing out, A, you might be incorrect, and B, you're talking about the Christians you've actually interacted with. I've seen people that are like that, and it's rare. Like your mom saying, "Oh, don't take away my faith." That that to me is an admission that she doesn't believe, and she knows that it's not real, but just wants to cling to it. And I think we oversimplify this a little bit, because I talk about it in terms of belief. And for me, belief is the cognitive position of accepting some proposition as true or likely true. I'm convinced this is the case. And then there's a separate issue, which is whether you actually believe it or not. Are you going to act as if you believe it and profess that you believe it? And, even the Bible notes that there's, a lot more people who are going to profess belief and act as if they believe than are actually going to be true believers. And, Jesus, and you depart from me, I never knew you type thing. And so we just recognize that is fundamental to human nature. There's going to be, you can do that with sports stuff too. I mean, how many people think that, believe the Dallas Cowboys are going to win the Super Bowl next year? Well, there's a fuck ton of people who will tell you they believe that, but do they really believe that? Or are they just fans, cheering it on, saying, no, I think we really have a good chance. And meanwhile, there's some fans that would look at it and say, no, I don't think we have a shot in hell at winning this year. So yeah, there's going to be different sample sizes, Ken, that are, or different sample groups where you're going to run across those people who probably don't believe, but desperately struggle to keep up the pretense of belief. And we knew that. I knew that when I was a Southern Baptist. There were people in the church that were like that, and you knew who they were.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious if what you're witnessing or whatnot when you talk to them is really a symptom of cognitive dissonance, and that just the way that they resolve that uncomfortable feeling of competing ideas is, they just adhere to what they've always known or what they believe. Like with your mom saying, "Don't take my faith away," or "Don't destroy my faith." I feel like that's just just a way to resolve those competing ideas, and get through that uncomfortable feeling. I'm not going to sit here and try to say that I know what's happening inside someone's mind, but just the outward facing things that you're describing kind of remind me of like some cognitive dissonance type of stuff.
I think that's probably true. I would agree with that. I just wanted to hear your take on it, and if you had experienced the same sort of feeling in talking to Christians over time. So I appreciate you discussing it with me and taking my call.
Yeah.
No problem, Ken.
I appreciate the call. On that note,
thanks, guys.
Thank you, Ken. We're going to let Ken go. I have shut down the phone system. John, we are almost out of time. Where do people find you, and what do you got going on right now?
Oh, well, you can find me over at Godless Engineer on pretty much any platform, but mostly here on YouTube. Typically I do like original content over there, but I'm knee deep in editing together an audiobook right now, and I got to try to get it done by the end of the month. So I've just been posting clips up over there of stuff that I do, like here on the line and other places. So if you enjoy topics surrounding like what we talked about today, then definitely come over there, subscribe. You won't be disappointed, I don't think. You might be, but that happens all the time.
Yeah. I'm always disappointed by the people who are disappointed. Just as a reminder, this is the Line Network, and there are a bunch of shows that take place on the line. The Sunday show here, we run from 2 to, well, today we're going to run till about 5 Central, but we may run longer on other occasions. But there's also the Sunday show after dark, and tonight it's going to be Paulogia and Eric from Skeptics and Scoundrels. Great opportunity here in just a little over 2 hours for any of the theists who didn't get in or didn't try to call in. Maybe they don't want to talk to me. Maybe they don't want to talk to John. But now you can possibly talk to Paul and Eric here in about 2 hours. Same bat channel, same phone call in, everything else. On Monday, it's Skeptalk with Aron Ra and Professor Dave. Tuesday is going to be Chewed Gum with Eve and Alyssa. And Wednesday is the Hang Up with Seth Andrews and Dara, the Magic Skeptic. Thursday's Transatlantic Call-In Show at 2 p.m. Central is going to be Josie and Luxander. And I will be back next Sunday at 2 p.m. Central with the one and only Jimmy Snow, who's not afraid to disappoint Daddy, Sky Daddy or otherwise. On that note, thanks everybody so much to tune in. You can go over to linemerch.com and find yourself some merch. And I know that our wonderful producer who's sitting down the hall, who's a little under the weather today, has been working on new merch and new stuff like that. You can go to patreon.com/calltheline and QNAline.com. We'll get you to all of our stuff. Thanks to all of our crew, our moderators, our call screener, and to Morgan for jumping in there. To our patron producers that are scrolling by right now, we love you, babe. That's what the song says. That's what we say. Try to make sure that you have good reasons for what you believe and that you can summarize those for any belief you have anytime somebody wants to know. It's a good start, but it's not the end.